Hello, these are flipped notes 6-3 of the development unit, and we're looking at childhood development stage theories. Right now I've got my Freud t-shirt on because he's got one of the big theories in this stage. So let's get to it. Freud's psychosexual stages of development. So with these stages, Freud was inspired by the Greek tragedy Oedipus the King by Sophocles, in which Oedipus kills his father and marries his mother. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the really, really short version. Freud said that all humans pass through these stages of development and that each of the stages focuses on a different part of the body. Like most of Freud's other theories, this one is not really considered valid, but we'll be able to use it as a basis of comparison to other development theories. A lot of the stuff from this theory shows up in pop culture. And again, like most of his other theories, most of this stuff is unconscious. The first of Freud's stage, theories is the oral stage, where the infant, according to Freud, bases pleasure on the mouth and the pleasure principle. So the pleasure principle means that it just seeks pleasure, doesn't really care about anybody else's thoughts, wants to be fed now, wants to be held now, wants to cry now, doesn't care, that the parents are sleeping, parents are eating, or anything else. So he said that most of that pleasure comes from sensations that involve the mouth, like nursing, sucking, and biting, the oral stage. The next stage is the anal stage, from 18 months to 3 years. And during this stage, Freud said that the big accomplishment is toilet training, and their pleasure centers around functions of elimination. And that one of the reasons that kids in this stage can be kind of difficult to handle, or unruly and irritable, that we call the terrible twos, is because they're struggling with trying to achieve that mastery of elimination or being able to control their bodily functions like peeing and pooping. And once they can do that, they've reached a sense of independence that makes them more confident. Again, this is unconscious to them, but that's what he says kind of affects their attitude so much at that age. The next stage is the phallic stage, where it gets a little bit weird, you guys. From 3 to 6 years old, Freud said that children are starting to recognize the difference between boys and girls. He said that little girls have penis envy and little boys have castration anxiety, that they've got one and they're scared the girls are going to take it away. To add on to that, Freud said that the boy's sexual interest starts to develop and focuses on the mother, and they develop an intense hatred and jealousy towards the father. This is known as the Oedipus complex, inspired by that Greek tragedy. So he said that the reason little boys at this age mimic their father and they want to do things the same way as their dad, it's not because they just want to be like dad, but because they want to be like dad because that's what mom likes, and they're trying to get the attention of mom unconsciously. He said that little girls had kind of the same thing going on. He called it the Electra complex, where little girls were unconsciously sexually in love with their fathers. Sometimes you hear a little, the kind of the basis for this is you hear little girls say things like, I want to marry daddy, or that they love daddy so much that they want them to be their husband. And yes, little kids say stuff like that. Do I think they have an unconscious sexual attraction? I do not. Most people did not like hearing Freud say this, but the Oedipus and Electra complex. Our next stage is the latent stage, and we've heard that term latent before when we talked about latent learning, the latent content of dreams, and latent, remember, means hidden. So from about age 6 through puberty, which is basically the majority of elementary school, Freud said that children repress those sexual thoughts and instead challenge them, or not challenge, channel them into the unconscious and are able to focus on learning, developing in sports, just all the things that go with intellectual development during school. And that channeling unacceptable thoughts into more approved avenues, he called that sublimation. That word will show up again in our personality unit. Freud said by the time kids reach puberty that they're in the genital stage, when their sexual desires have rekindled, they're forming relationships, they start rebelling against the rules and authority. Our next stage theory is from Jean Piaget, probably one of the most well-known names when it comes to child psychology. He studied his own children for years, and then once his children grew up, he studied any children that he could find. He watched them at parks and at schools, but he was really fascinated with how children play, because he said how they play is so much about how they learn. He did believe that children move from stage to stage as they were exposed to different relevant experiences, and that that's what shaped their development. So this idea of development occurring in stages is called discontinuous development, that they have these very defined stages that have starting and stopping points, in contrast to continuous development, which is more incremental and just more gradual. But Piaget believed in discontinuous development. Piaget also said that our development is the result of our biological development along with the environment. That so much of what we know is because we've learned from mistakes. So Piaget would not have said these little kids right here are dumb for trying to slide on this itty bitty slide or trying to squeeze themselves into this miniature car. He said children just really think differently. And until they've had the experiences that they can learn from, they just don't know the same things that adults know who have had those experiences. All right, so with cognitive development, Piaget said that everybody develops schemas or mental molds in which we pour our experiences. So schemas are basically just concepts. Our schema for a ball, something that rolls. And we talked about this in the last chapter. A dog, something furry with 4 legs. Grandma, any older lady. And our schemas get more specific with experience. So we can think of schemas as file folders, and that we file things into the folders that they most accurately fit. Well, as we get older, we create more folders. So he calls this assimilation. When we come across something new, we have to blend it. We at first blend it into what we already have a schema for. So we've got a horse, we come across a zebra, it looks kind of like a horse. So we put the zebra into our horse schema. That's assimilation. But eventually, we start to realize there's differences between a horse and a zebra. And that becomes accommodation. We adapt our existing schema to incorporate new information. Another example, assimilation. Little kids think anything with 4 legs is a doggy. They've met their dog first. Now they see a cat, maybe a mouse, other dogs. They think all of those are doggies. They've blended them into their existing schema. That's assimilation. Accommodation is when they start to realize a dog and a cat are not the same. So they form an additional schema. So they become more specific with their current schema. A dog is anything with 4 legs and it barks. That's what makes it a doggy. So they have accommodated their existing schema. Piaget also identified different specific stages of cognitive development. So we'll look at each of these 4 stages. In the first, we call it sensory motor. They're experiencing the world primarily through their senses. Through looking at everything, through hearing, touching is really big. Mouthing, they want to put everything in their mouth from 0 to 2 years old, and grasping. But this is really how they're using their senses to explore the world. Probably the biggest milestone within the sensory motor stage is reaching what's called object permanence. And that happens right around 9 months. Before object permanence, when something is out of sight, it does not exist in their mind to them anymore. They cannot picture it in their mind. But once they reach object permanence, people, objects, they continue to exist even if they can't see them anymore. So if you hide something from a 4-month-old, they're not going to try very hard to look for it because it doesn't exist to them anymore. But a 10-month-old, you hide it, they're going to look for it because they know that it continues to exist. Peekaboo is real exciting to little kids who haven't reached object permanence because when you cover your face, you completely disappeared. You did not exist anymore. And then when you reveal your face, oh my gosh, you're still here. That's very exciting to them. Our second stage is called the pre-operational stage, starting to use words and representing things with words and images, but they're more intuitive rather than logical. So one of the biggest things Piaget said about this stage was that children are egocentric, that they cannot perceive things from another's point of view. They can understand that my feelings can be different from their feelings. They think that everybody's feeling the same way that they are. And the way they can actually see something, like with their eyes, is how other people are seeing it as well. It's egocentric. So a child playing hide and go seek, they may just turn around and face the wall. They're not really hiding, but they can't see you, so they assume you can't see them. This example, when asked to show her picture to mommy, 2-year-old Gabriella holds the picture facing her own eyes. Mom can't see the picture, but Gabriella can see the picture, so she assumes mom can as well. She's egocentric. So Piaget said they're not selfish. It's not the same thing as being selfish. They just cannot perceive things from another point of view. We'll watch this classic video example in class with a little boy in the volcano. Another thing going on in the preoperational stage is that children at this age lack the concept of conservation. They don't get that something can change its shape, but still keep its volume or quantity. So a 4-year-old doesn't understand that 8 ounces of Kool-Aid in a short, wide glass is the same as 8 ounces in a tall, skinny glass. So the classic way that this experiment is done is that they show the little kids the liquid in the 2 glasses, and it's the same amount. And they get them to acknowledge which one has more. They say they both have the same. Then in front of them, they pour the liquid from one glass into a taller, skinnier glass. And then they ask the kids which one has more, or do they have the same? And kids who have not reached conservation do not get that it's the same amount. They usually think it's the tall, skinny one because it just looks taller. So they can't understand that the volume has stayed the same even though it has changed shapes. They have not grasped conservation. The experiment shows that this works in other forms too, by numbers. If they take the quarters, or there's checkers here, and they spread them out, they think the top row has more. Or if they take balls of clay and they change the shape of the clay, they think the one that's in the ball has more clay. Or if they move the sticks, they think that that stick on the right is bigger. So they just cannot understand that things can change shape, but still conserve their quantity or their volume. Another thing that starts to happen during this preoperational stage is theory of mind. So while they're still egocentric, they are starting to develop the ability to understand another person's mental state. We'll talk about the false belief problem, and we'll watch a video that goes with this one in class. Our third stage is the concrete operational stage from 7 to 11 years old. Kids usually reach this right around kind of the edge of kindergarten and first grade. It really varies. So at concrete operational, the big thing is now they understand conservation, that things can change shape and they conserve their quantity and their volume. The other thing is that they can understand reversibility. So for example, in math, 4 plus 8 equals 12. That also is the same as 12 minus 4 equals 8. So little kids who have not reached this stage, they're going to struggle with math problems. So that's why sometimes in first grade, kids who are just not developmentally there are going to be much more challenged by some of the math stuff that other kids seem to grasp very easily. It's just they're not developed at the same state. And then the final stage, according to Piaget, is the formal operational stage, which is where you are. It's where I am, from 12 to adulthood. And this one, the main trait is abstract reasoning, that kids can start to approach problems more systematically. They can rule out possibilities. They can, I think of alternative and hypothetical ideas. Piaget said not everybody reaches this stage. Some people just don't ever get to where they can think more abstractly, but most of us do. Most, about 60% of adults do reach this stage. All right, that's it for the child development stage theories and 6-3 flipped notes.